talk too much, but I did want to invite you all to stay for dinner afterwards if anyone would like to stay. They'll have a full menu and all of that. And you can, I think there's menus here, and I think people can order while we're talking, right? So if you get bored, you can have a bowl of soup or something. And also a little advertising, we have our reading series going on next Monday. We have a fabulous reading of Racine's Berenice. So if any of you are interested in that, you can get your tickets online or by calling the number in our brochure, which is over there. It's next Monday the 14th at 7:30 p.m. over at the theater at St. Clements, where we normally perform, etc. So tonight's whole session is going to be moderated by Alex Teague, and I'm very pleased to welcome Barry. Oh my God, Steve. I knew I was going to get it wrong, whichever way I went.
Like spring.
My grandfather's name is Steinman, so I always want to go with Steinman.
Oh, I answered it.
Barry Steve, who is a distinguished director of classic music about his and John McWhorter, a noted linguist and commentator, and you can read about him on the program introduction tables. So thank you again all for coming. And I will turn it over to Alex, who will turn it over to these two gentlemen, and I hope you all enjoy.
Thanks, Jesse. Thanks everybody for coming out. The origin of this whole session really arose when John wrote a blog post on the New Republic discussing how he felt that people weren't getting as much out of Shakespeare's poetry as they were out of more contemporary playwrights, because of the very fact that Shakespeare's language is now 500 years old, and some of the subtle meanings of the vocabulary of the sentence construction is essentially lost to a contemporary audience. And so he proposed the somewhat inflammatory suggestion that that Shakespeare productions might be better off being translated into contemporary English. And kind of discussed the pros and cons of what that would mean for a production, and it had the expected effect on commenters sort of were incensed by the idea, and people were suitably offended by this affront to being a bard. But I thought it brought up a pretty good point about how even as someone with my background in early modern English, that I guess I would only say I feel comfortable with like 80% of Shakespearean vocabulary, and that's after years of education. And so I thought it would be great to bring John out to kind of talk further about it, and then to have Barry here as his loyal, having sort of confronted the same problem, while at the same time really embracing the idea of keeping Shakespeare's language intact. And so with that, I guess I'll kick it off with John to let him make his case.
Thank you, Alex. This is an interesting issue because I've learned from when I did the New Republic blog, and when I've discussed it with some people have literally yelled in my face about this. This really deeply offends people, and as such, I do have to spell out a couple of things briefly. It's absolutely necessary. First of all, it's not that I'm deaf to poetry. It's not that I'm saying that because the language is challenging, that therefore we just have to make it easier. As a linguist myself, been one for 20 years, and as one who specializes partly in the history of the English language, it's not that I don't appreciate dense language. So it's not that. I'm definitely not one to argue that things need to be easier. Then the second thing that's important is that for whatever it's worth, I am very much a lover of theater. I see almost everything on Broadway every year, have for a long time. I have 700 musical theater cast albums in my home. So it's not that I don't like theater. It's that I have had an experience when watching Shakespeare plays live and cold, and this is what's important, that I think other people are having, and I suspect, and I can't get it done in its brains, but I suspect that other people who are seeing the plays cold, live, which is the way they were meant to be presented by the person who wrote them, are having too. And so, yes, I think we can all agree that if you have time to read the play beforehand with the annotations, if you have time to do that for every Shakespeare assuming that so many of us have time to do that for every Shakespeare play that we see, then certainly when you see it done on stage, live, you're in a position to understand that's true. My question is it just, is it fair, is it realistic to expect that a large proportion of the audience at Shakespeare performances is going to have done that, especially in this era in which the printed page is receding ineluctably ever more from the consciousness of people below a certain age? And whether or not we can say that if we haven't done that, then listening to the language rolling by us quickly when we haven't read it before, which, let's face it, most people haven't and never will, whether you can substantially appreciate the play. And I'm not going to go on for much longer, but I do not believe that having a British accent makes it better. I have had many theater friends, that's been part of my entire adult life, who've told me in all earnestness that it's a matter of conveying the language. I don't find that that's true. I've tried. I have sat through The Tempest without having read it first 3 times and gotten about 20%. And I'm pretty good with language. And these were people who thought they were getting it across. I don't think I'm alone. And that's why I wrote the blog piece. And I think that it is not enough to say that we should appreciate it as poetry. What we mean by that is that we're not really going to understand most of what's being said. And so, this is the sort of thing I mean. And I decided to bring something that I didn't put into the blog piece just to kind of keep myself awake. This is measure for measure now. You haven't read it before. For those of you who have, it's different. But I have never been made to read this one. And I can imagine that the beginning, Duke Vincentio has some things to say. This is what you get live. You haven't read it before. You haven't had annotations. You're just sitting there listening. Let's say that it's somebody with a British accent. Let's say that they're getting the language across. Let's say that it's a great staging. Probably it's in Haiti or something, and they get novel. Now, here's the Duke. Of government, the properties to unfold would seem in me to affect speech and discourse, since I am put to know that your own science exceeds in that the list of all advice my strength can give you. Just that alone. Now, I was reading through that last night, and I picked through it, and I didn't look at any annotations, but I think I can get what that means. And if somebody has to listen to that going by in 20 seconds, I don't think that that's comprehensible. Let's think about it. Of government, the properties to unfold. What's to unfold? Now, you don't have the annotation. You're hearing it through your ear. There's reading, and then there's listening. So, of government, the properties to unfold. Now, if I think about it, I get the feeling that it means to explain. But that's an archaic usage. I don't have that in my brain, listening to language as it goes on in my daily life. Would seem in me to affect speech and discourse. Affect how? And actually reading it, again, I don't quite get what the effect is. I'd have to get an annotated edition. Of course, I can't do that while I'm listening to it live for the first time without having read it. So, of government, the properties to unfold would seem in me to affect speech and discourse, since I am put to know that your own science exceeds in that the list of all advice my strength can give you. Now, I know that the science means knowledge, because I happen to know that. But for somebody who hasn't read it before, they think of science as the white coat and DNA. And then you have to think, well, it doesn't mean that. And by the time you thought that, the person is 3 paragraphs ahead. And that's the whole experience. One more example. Twelfth Night, which is one of the easier ones to experience live. But there's so much that you miss without knowing it. Here's Viola. I remember seeing this for the first time, and I remember a laugh on this line that was based on not being able to understand what it means now. This fellow was wise enough to play the fool, and to do that well craves a kind of wit, giggle. He must observe their mood on whom he jests, the quality of persons and the time, and ... Now, this fellow is wise enough to play the fool, and to do that well craves a kind of wit. Wit as in champagne humor, as in Noel Coward, as in irony. No. Shakespeare meant wit as in knowledge, and that still persists on the boundaries of our language now as mother wit, to keep your wits about you. We know that, but this is live language. And when she says wit, nowadays, the typical person, unless they've read it beforehand,